Marisa, hi, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you. So good to be here.
I know we're just starting to, we haven't met before, so we're just getting to know each other a little bit. For our audience and for me, can you give us your background? Like, where did you grow up and, what did you do as a kid?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Reston, Virginia, which is widely known as the first successful planned city. And I gotta say that my background is I was a planned child. Like the day I was born, my dad had a big plan for me. So he's actually a financial, like a bank financial architect. And so from the moment I was born, he had this whole kind of future mapped out for me, and used to give me four spreadsheets every single month to show me the value of a dollar. But the one thing that the plan forgot was me. And so I've really learned, the hard way about how to support people in building a business, creating a plan for their life that actually aligns with who they are and what they want and their natural gifts and strengths. So where I was born and raised really interestingly contributed to that feeling like I was born to follow someone else's path and plan.
So, yeah, born into a planned city by a dad that likes to plan a lot. So, did you just feel like a bit like a kind of a cog in his plan versus the creator of your own? I mean, what did that feel like?
Yeah, well, I like to say that, this plan wasn't just laid down in dirt. It felt like it was laid down in cement and concrete. Literally, the day that I was born, my dad started mutual funds for my college education. And then he actually started my resume for me when I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I remember at the family reunions, he would stand in the door and be handing everyone a copy of my resume and saying, "Look at Marisa, here's what she's done on page 5, look at that. Isn't she amazing?" And it was always this kind of expectation to perform in really specific ways and paths in life. Like my dad thought I'd be a good lawyer or a good journalist. And all of these, I'm glad I didn't become a journalist. I'll say that now with everything happening in the world of AI. And even though, I love to talk and maybe I'm good at debate and things like that, law never interested me. So I think that so many people inherit ideas about what they're here to do in terms of career or business or simply providing for their family that oftentimes isn't necessarily what they really want. And I think that background allowed me to see, what it is that I really want and not take that for granted and sort of understand how often we make choices based on that conditioning or expectations or simply
Totally.
obligation or responsibility. And so it was less that I felt like I was a cog in the wheel than that, the expectations for me in life just did not align with who I was and what I wanted. And then finding my way back to understanding who I was and what I really wanted, that took a long time. I think it took me into my 30s to really understand that.
When did you start pushing back on the master plan? And what did that do with the relationship with your dad? Because it sounds like, well, I don't know, you tell me, but it sounds like you said, it wasn't in it was written in cement, I think you said. So like, what was that like when you started not being kind of the conformist or, the good girl or whatever he wanted you to be?
Well, I think I had two sides. I certainly made straight A's and did really well in school and all of that. But at the same time, I was an artist. I was born to be creative. And so I remember I would ask for things like, Dad, I want a drum for Christmas. And he's like, "Why would you want a drum? It's a waste of your your intellectual abilities." Or I want to be a photographer. "Why would you want to be a photographer? It's an inferior art form to painting and it's a waste of your intellect anyway." And so I think that from the start, I would always kind of express what I wanted because I love to craft, I love to read books, I love to write, I love to do all of those things. And at the same time, I would do them. Like I couldn't not do them because they're a huge part of who I was. And at the same time, I definitely know that it wasn't looked upon as kind of valuable things to do. It wasn't looked upon as a way to contribute to the world and to become like a financially independent member of society and all of that. And so I think I had a belief system that if I chose to do what I love and what I was good at, that I would never make money and I would be a starving artist. And it took me a very long time to recognize that the skill set that I started to build from the time I was a little girl just by following my interests like art and literature and communication was actually the foundation of all business and marketing. The ability
Right.
to make things look good and sound good and tell good stories. And I didn't realize that in a different context, these creative skills had massive value. And what got me paid $1,000 a week in one industry, I was actually a documentary filmmaker for a while, could get me paid, $5,000, $6,000 an hour in another industry. Just
How
finding
did
the right context for those gifts.
No, that's cool. Thank you for that. What were some of your first jobs like when you were in your 20s and just out of school?
Yeah, well, just out of school, I was thinking first job going way back. I was a paper girl,
Yeah, me
delivering
too. That
newspapers,
was my
from
first gig
high
too.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably we're part of the same generation, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
because, kids today do not have that as their first job.
No.
But in college, my first job was actually, well, in school, like in grad school, I was a communication director of at the Royal College of Art because that's where I was getting my master's degree, and then I also pulled pints at the bar. My graduate school education happened right around the time of 9/11. So I actually was flying to London to get my graduate graduate degree on 9/11. And so I ended up getting grounded and not being able to go and then losing all the funds from my grad school education. So I had a lot of very unglamorous jobs for a while, just trying to make ends meet. And then when I finally did graduate and I went back to the US with my, master's degree in communication art and design from the Royal College of Art, I couldn't really get any jobs or interviews. Like nobody was interested. And I kind of felt like my dad was right, all of this time pouring into my creative pursuits that I was unmarketable. He even told me, I wasted $150,000 on your education and you came out with no marketable skills. So
Mm.
it took me a while. I went and was an assistant for Maxwell Taylor Kennedy, the youngest son of Robert F. Kennedy, for a little while, helping him with his research and chasing after dogs that would get loose from the backyard and run through the streets. And I was a bus girl at, to the end of the seventh grade, Ray in Topanga Canyon, where, you'd get celebrities like Stevie Wonder and Viggo Mortensen and Charlize Theron. So I was clearing all their plates. And eventually I got my first documentary film job. And then that was my first career for 7 years.
It's interesting, isn't it, that when the wiring or like what we've been told, in your case, this isn't marketable, this is going to lead to nowhere, and you're trying to go against the grain, or actually with the grain, with your own grain, right? Just not on someone else's plan. But when times get tough, man, it's so hard not to go back there, right? It's the I told you so's, all of those limiting beliefs come back up. But it sounds like you kept staying true to yourself, though, right? You never kind of reverse directions completely. I mean, were you always like, when you were in your 20s, you're having these doubts, were you still like, whatever, like, I have doubts, but I'm gonna make it or die trying? Or was it, maybe I ought to go try to be a lawyer or go try to do something like that?
I don't think following that plan was actually ever an option for me. I
Right.
don't think I'm designed in a way. I mean, anyone who's entrepreneurial, like I am, or entrepreneurial,
Right.
needs to do something that really aligns with them. And so I've never been particularly good at following rules or directions. And so I think I was naturally creative and naturally entrepreneurial. And so that kind of idea of following a plan that somebody else gave to me without my buy-in was just not something that I could do. So I was sort of consigned, I think, to feeling like I'd be a starving artist, struggling artist for a very long time. And it was only when I started to realize, I read a statistic that the average documentary film takes 10 years to make and is seen by less than 1,000 people, where I thought, you know what, maybe I'm wasting a little bit of my time making these films. And I felt, by the time that a film was done, the world had moved on and I had moved on. And so I just started to ask, well, what else can I do? And like I said, I was like, I know how to make things look good and sound good and tell a good story, but I didn't know who needed that or who would pay for that or where that had any value. And eventually I started to think, well, maybe the intersection of internet and entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
because filmmaking is slow and the internet is fast. And, maybe somewhere in this intersection they would need me. And that's all I knew. And so then I started to kind of learn more about internet marketing and online business. And then I surprised myself at being really freaking good at it because of all the things that I had learned
It's
and
the
studied. And
systems, probably,
yeah.
right? It's the systems background that came into play a little bit, right? Because it's a mix of, I think, marketing, and especially if you're talking about like email marketing and social media marketing and stuff like that, I feel like it's this combination of your creative side plus that upbringing of structure and process and stuff like that. It seems like it was the perfect collision.
100%. It was actually a really good gift, the gift of being able to follow a plan
Yeah.
and to be really strategic and long, looking far out into the future, but combined with my creativity,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
actually developed an approach to kind of business coaching and mentorship that I call flow mapping and road mapping that actually combines those two things, because road mapping is what to do when, it's the proven strategies at each stage of business growth. And flow mapping is how do you kind of align what you do in your business so it doesn't just work for your business, it works for you. Like, what's your mission, vision, and goals? What are your strengths? What are your challenges? What's the natural pace that you want to go, both at this stage of life and also just in general, based on your design as a human, whether you're more of a quick start or a fact finder or whatever else it happens you happen to be. So very interestingly, I needed that kind of challenge to discover what not just worked for me, but what I've seen works for a lot of other people in terms of how do you support someone in being successful, but also being fulfilled and doing it in a way that works for them.
When did you know for sure that was that the moment that you knew for sure you were going to be like an entrepreneur? Like, hey, if I'm gonna find something that's right for me, it's gonna have to come from me. Is that it? Was that the moment?
That actually took a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So I was just guessing, like, who would need my skills? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Where are my skills going to be valuable? And because I've been told my whole life that I was never going to make money with my creativity and my artistry,
Right.
I felt like I was grasping at straws.
Right.
And well, maybe the internet and entrepreneurship, and it was just a guess. So I think that, and at each stage along the way, I feel like, at first I started a branding agency and web design agency because it was the transference of my skill set into just another form of kind of production and creativity. And then eventually I realized that I was really doing it in a super strategic way. And then eventually, my kind of boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband of 11 years, asked me, why don't you create a course, like an online course? And I remember saying, well, who would want to learn from me? And what would I even talk about? And so even that, the very first time that my boss asked me to create an email newsletter, I was like, who would want to read a newsletter?
Right.
It was like one
Right.
of these things, like the first exposure to a lot of these things. I mean, I was a photographer at some business workshop. Someone asked me to go in exchange for the event. And it took me going to that event 4 times and seeing people go up there as success on the success panel saying how, entrepreneurship changed their lives before I even began to think, well, maybe
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
I am entrepreneurial. So this was actually completely off the radar for me. It was one of those things that was such a surprise. Like for me, creativity and business or finance, because my dad and my brother were both finance people, they just didn't go together.
Right.
When I discovered that they did, and that wow, the skills that I have can be massively useful in this domain. It was like a really big surprise. Like I never saw it coming. I was not that kid. Like my brother would go. There'd be these big block garage sales, and he'd be the kid who would go early and buy all this best stuff and then kind of mark it up and resell
Resell
it.
it later. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be the kid who was like selling, prepackaged little boxes of candy at high school and making lots of money. And I was just the kid reading books. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
totally.
there was no indication that this would actually be the direction I would go in.
It's so funny. Totally off the set. Well, no, on the subject, but little side note. Our son, when I first noticed he had entrepreneurial skills, we'd go in for him to buy like baseball cards, right? And then they'd have here's all the seconds, here's all the duplicates and stuff like that. And there'd literally be like thousands of cards, and the card shop owner would just be like, just give me $20 for that whole box. And then yeah, he'd go back, wrap them, in like things of 10, sell them for like $3 each. It's crazy how we all, take to those. But you didn't have those early entrepreneurial instincts, or at least they weren't developed yet. And now you're kind of struggling against your own I don't say self-doubt, but kind of like, yeah, who would want this? When you started building the company, was it kind of an eye-opener? Because you've got this creative side, and I don't want to stereotype everybody, but sometimes the things creatives lack is that structure, whereas sometimes the structure freaks lack creativity, right? And you're bringing them both together. Did it hit kind of, what was that pace like? What was that ramp up like when you started working on your own?
I mean, I think it's a process of following the trail of breadcrumbs, to be honest,
Yeah.
where, one thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, leads to, oh my gosh, I've done $50 million in sales of online courses and programs, and I've had 17,000, paying students and inspired more than 1 million hours of human, action, like life-changing action. Just being like, whoa, how did that happen? You know what I'm saying? For
Yeah.
me, it's been following the clues of, okay, well, maybe let me try this, maybe let me try that. And just continuing to follow that and also continuing to have the desire to create great work. And I think that, sometimes what we see as entrepreneurial skill set is the desire to make money. But I
Yeah.
think that true entrepreneurialism is about solving problems and creating, innovative solutions and seeing things in the world that other people don't necessarily see. Does that make sense? And
That
so
makes a
what I
lot of
thought
sense. I
was
love the way you
business,
put that.
yeah. So what I thought was business and entrepreneurialism was just like, let me make a buck any which way I can. And that's what I had modeled to me
Right.
versus true entrepreneurialism is actually what I'd been doing since I was a little girl, which is developing passions and obsessions and developing skills and just going down the rabbit hole of all these things and kind of pushing the envelopes of what I knew and what I was capable of. And so that's what I'd always done. And I just didn't think that that was the skill of, an entrepreneur,
Right. Because
right?
again, the model was it's this, it's hard charging, it's make money, yeah. And so it sounds like when you say follow the breadcrumbs, and I'm thinking, you seem to be a person who is going to take life as it comes a little bit, right? Like, even as you're going into this, it's like, well, just do the next best thing you can do at that time, right? And build from there and then build on that and build on that. What was it like? Had you been in leadership roles before? Because you built a substantial company now. What was it like as the company started to grow and you started
Yeah.
to hire people? And did you adapt to leadership right away?
Yeah, well, I would say that, being a documentary filmmaker, a producer, and a director, there are a lot of people that I was coordinating to implement visions and get things done.
Yeah.
I would say that there's different ways to look at leadership. I think I'm more of a leader than I am a manager. So creatives are really notoriously bad managers because for a creative, anything is possible. And a creative tends to put everything into a creative vision and not necessarily, love constraints, but that also can be really motivating for a team. But when it comes to being there in the day to day, managing a team in the implementation of a vision as they hit the kind of constraints and whatever it happens to be, that's where, I would say, like I prefer to go into my creative cave and think and dream and make amazing work and then come and sort of bring the team together and talk and collaborate, but then go back. So I think that there's just different forms of leadership, and the way that a creative would lead might be very different than someone who's more of a supporter or someone who's, and these are, wealth dynamics profiles. I don't know if
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know much
Yeah.
about that, but
Yeah.
yeah, Roger Hamilton, who developed the wealth dynamics, is a friend of mine. And I think those ideas of these different ways in which you create wealth and the different forms of leadership is really valuable because it doesn't just look one way.
But you felt like it seems like you had an understanding of what your leadership style was kind of early on, and kind of leaned into your strengths, and I'm assuming learned from, did you have challenges at all as you were hiring early on, or
Oh
was
yeah.
it, yeah.
Hiring has not necessarily been my absolute gift
Yeah.
because, like I said, as a possibility thinker, I think that everyone is awesome.
Yeah.
And I just think that everyone will always do their absolute best work and do what it takes to get the job done. And if they don't know somehow to do something, just figure it out. And
Yeah.
be able to like say, okay, here's what we need to do. And then most people would just go off and make it happen and deliver beyond all kind of like expectations because that's what I always did. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
And so I have the cognitive bias that I believe that other people are like me,
Yeah.
and realizing that they're not. And what makes someone who's great inside of an organization is different than what makes someone who's great as an employee. And so I think I still have to learn how much instruction and parameters and definition and SOPs and project plans
Yeah.
that people need. And so I've evolved into that, along the way. But the interesting thing is I don't actually need any of that to work at my best.
Right.
So that's been the really tricky thing for me in hiring and leading is that, essentially I need a team of people who are not like me. And so
Right.
then understanding how do you hire for people not like you, and then how do you give them what they need when it's really different. So I think that's been one of the biggest learning curves of my life, is trying to not just share a vision, but to, give someone what they need to succeed.
No, that's great. That's a great explanation. I had someone on this show not too long ago who talked about KPIs, right? Which I guess I would consider myself a KPI guy. I like standards and all that. But as we talked through it, he was sort of anti KPI in terms of like company wide KPIs, right? That those are,
I love KPIs,
I do
so,
too. But what he
and I
didn't
love
like,
company-wide
well,
KPIs
he
too.
didn't like one standard for everybody. He
Yeah.
liked sort of the recognition of where someone is at their stage of development, right? And then KPIs for the individual, right? Which and then we have those roll up to the company one. So I think it all kind of made sense. But I'm wondering with your personality type, then did you have a tendency sometimes to, and do you still, to hang on to people a little too long? Because it sounds like you have a disposition towards trust, right? Like you just trust people. You
Yeah,
trust
yeah,
they're
I
going to do your
do.
best work. Yeah,
I do have a tendency to hang on to people a little too long. I actually
yeah,
want to circle back to that idea of KPIs, because one of the things that was really game changer for us was to define not just the company-wide KPIs, which is ultimately the strategy for how we're growing, evolving, but also what I call it the North Star KPI. What is the one most important metrics of a company that really exhibits our values and our strategy? And our North Star KPI is actually customer success. And it's not revenue, right? And if
right.
you're only optimizing for revenue, I think it can actually lead to a lot of bad decisions. But because part of the world that I move in and my expertise is online education and creating engagement when it comes to learning virtually, and so student success numbers are actually our top company-wide KPI. And what I found is that, well, the average, online course only gets 3 to 7% completion. And I developed a methodology to get 10 to 30 times more engagement, completion, student success. So our North Star metric is that every program and product and course that we sell gets a minimum of 51% student success. Now, 51% is way more than 3%, because then we can look people in the eye when we're marketing or supporting them to say that more people succeed than fail, and that nobody else draws their line in the sand like that. And then, of course, beyond that, the next level might be what we achieved in a particular program, the previous year. So then it's like, say, 55%, then say it's 60%. But what we found is that by prioritizing student success, lifetime customer value went off the charts. And when we doubled down on this metric, it moved other metrics. So we doubled down on customer success, which then created the impact and the flow on effect of skyrocketing customer loyalty and long-term customer value. And so of the 50 million in sales we've done, I think something like pretty high percentage of people, our lifetime customer values is about $5,500. And some people come in buying low ticket programs. Some people have been in our year-long business growth program for 9 years. So what I love about customer or KPIs, company-wide KPIs, is I believe it's both the business strategy and it's the value system. It's the bet that we're making in the marketplace of how we're going to succeed and differentiate long term. And if you look at, say, the rise of AI or all of that, AI is not necessarily prioritizing user experience and success.
Right.
So it's prioritizing speed of response, for example.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to optimize to get the accuracy of the response, but what people do with that material, how do they use it to kind of change their life or whatever it happens to be? Not so much.
How did you guys get? I know I'm probably going to take a several years and just tell you to take it as slow or as fast as you want. But 50 million in online sales is an incredible number. So how did you get from, okay, I'm going to follow my intuition, maybe there's something here, to 50 million bucks in not that long of how many years since you guys
That
started?
took a decade. I'm actually 13 years. So I started my company the end of 2011. So we are now in 2015. So we're talking about a long time. So I
I
always say,
get it, but it's still 50 million. I mean, it's impressive. Like, what did
right.
that
Well,
arc look like?
impressive considering it's all in some ways products that came out of my own brain and creativity and imagination. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? We're not selling something physical, we're selling something invisible, which
right.
is essentially a transformation that we make in the market for people, helping them solve problems, get what they want in their own lives and businesses. So that's pretty cool because in that particular space, the economics look a little bit different. But I would say that, what really shifted for me was doubling down on I when I first started, I would just create courses and programs like, oh, well, do one about personal branding, do one about storytelling, do one about web design. But I wasn't really thinking about what am I going to be the best in the world at? What am I going to become known for? What would a blockbuster hit look like? Because the impact of a blockbuster is exponential. So you can have a lot of underperforming products and never become known for anything, or you can find that blockbuster hit. And it took me a while. 2016 was when I launched my blockbuster hit product. And the curve of the business changed at that particular point because I really took a stand in the market, created a brand new methodology around online education and course creation and learning. And that then really skyrocketed us to the next level because it was unmistakable and it was very different from what everyone else created. And I think the process of finding that sort of secret sauce was on the other side of trying to do things the way that everybody else was doing things and seeing that it wasn't working, right? I remember when I started to develop my first courses and start to see people just drop out or refund or disengage. I remember going up to a colleague and saying, is this happening to you too? And my colleague looked at me and said, yeah, but maybe not everyone's meant to succeed. And I just remember it felt like a punch in the gut because I'm like, what are
Yeah,
you talking about? And if we're selling programs and courses, we're doing it with the assumption that a lot of people are just not going to succeed and aren't meant to succeed. And that just felt wrong to me.
yeah.
And so from that point, I went to look at, well, where in the world are people good at, capturing attention and driving engagement? And it brought me to the world of kind of apps and games and all of that. And then, Pokemon Go burst on the scene in 2016. And I remember because my husband and I had been, on a vacation in Europe. And at the end of the vacation, we're walking through Trastevere, like the ancient neighborhood in Rome. And we're walking down this dark cobblestone street and we hear this shuffling off in the shadows and we stop dead in our tracks. I mean, we thought we were going to get jumped or something.
Yeah.
And it's these two, like this couple, just like giggling over their phones. And my husband says, Pokemon. And they just jump up like busted like school children and run off. And then he shows me when we get home, I'm like, Pokemon, what's Pokemon? And he shows me on YouTube videos of people stampeding through Central Park and, Santa Monica and cities around the world, just chasing these little virtual creatures on their phone. I'm like, I've never seen people get this excited about changing their lives for the better, about going after their hopes and dreams. I mean, can we apply these mechanics over here?
Right.
So people are
Makes
going to chase
sense.
through the streets for something. Why don't they chase through the streets for what they really want in life, right?
Yeah.
That's what we should be chasing through the streets for, right? So how do we do that? And I think those kind of all of that, like I said, following the clues was about, okay, I'm going to just launch something the way everybody else is launching something, create like a mediocre course because that's all I could do at the time. But it was by creating those first mediocre courses, seeing the response, not being happy with the response, trying to do something about it, then looking at, well, how can I do something about it, and kind of obsessing over that question that the innovation came through.
And so as you guys started to introduce like gaming and like different ways of yeah, gaining people's interest and get them in there, you said 2016 was kind of it just took off. Did your sales like did they double? Did they like where did they go from where they were?
Yeah. Well, I think 2016 was when I launched this new program about creating experiential,
Yeah.
right? About the experience design, the experience formula. And then, I think 2017 or 2018 was the first $1 million launch, not just $1 million a year, but $1 million launch of the course cohort. And then we're getting pretty close to pandemic time. And then our business doubled over the course of the pandemic. So we were 4 years in a row on the Inc. 5000 list of
Nice.
fastest growing companies in America. Would have been five if I hadn't even known to apply,
Yeah.
you know? And so a lot of it's been, as that happened, the pandemic happened, then all of a sudden all of my little experiments in online learning and online engagement and experience was like, oh shit, everybody needs to focus on this now. Does that make
Totally.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you were, I don't want to say right place, right time because you had been building this for a long time, but by the time COVID hit, it's another kind of perfect storm for you in a way, because you've got the right product at the right time with the right experience. You had been through what you needed to, and now you've got a massive captive audience at home, like, to support you. I'm
Yeah, and
curious. Oh,
the
go ahead.
interesting thing is I feel like I have that again because with the way AI is coming into the market, I think that every company is going to have a chief information slash AI officer and a chief experience officer. And so now all of this work in experience design, I mean, it goes beyond online learning and training, but really, how do you create the experiences for your customers, for your team, for your market that are going to continue to differentiate you when someone can go onto AI and say, just replicate this company, replicate this software, trying
Right.
to create a new variation or formulation to do this thing better, right?
Right.
Now that anyone has that at their disposal, why are people going to choose some companies over others, right? I think it's actually the user experience. So I think it's actually coming around again, but in this other context. And so, I've been getting excited about certifying chief experience officers and then placing them inside of companies and helping with the experience design.
That's really cool. I'm a little bit back to what we're talking about. So now you've had this enormous success. You've sold 50 million online products. Did you get recognition from your dad on your achievements? Is that still a battle?
Not really,
Yeah.
I don't think he quite gets it, and it's a weird kind of little industry to understand. Even my mom used to be like, Marisa, you need money to eat? You need me to send you for food? Like they thought because I was working for myself that means I was broke and not
Yeah.
making any
Yeah.
money and
Yeah.
and all of that. So, I mean, I think there's little comments like he walked into my house and he says, "Oh, so this is how the 1% live." But it was never anything like,
To me,
"Hey,
that would be a compliment. I'd be like, yep, you're right. That's how we live. I'll take
yeah,
it.
yeah."
Um, you've been at this for a while. Your signature product launched, 7, 8 years ago now. Um, I would imagine, because of the success you had, that it sounds like that product was standalone, first of its kind. Do you have competitors kind of chasing you, trying to replicate the success that you guys have had?
Well, other people are integrating some, gamification and things into their programs. We do have a platform, we do have the methodology, but I don't think anyone's, doing it as holistically as we really are. So, a lot of people have programs teaching people how to create online courses, but I don't know if anyone else has really doubled down on course completion
Right.
and student success as the core kind of drivers than having this experiential methodology.
Is that the bulk driver of your revenue now? Is selling to course creators, selling training to course creators?
Well, I mean, so that's kind of our front end program that a lot of people enter our world in, but we also make equal or more sales for our year-long business coaching program. So we actually, and many people are consultants, coaches, service providers who end up in that program. Many of them have a desire for some level of leverage and scale. So at least group programs and online courses are, a form that many people choose, but there are other formats as well. I mean, there are memberships, subscriptions, certifications. Like there's a lot of different ways in which you can find some kind of leverage or scale with as a coach, as a service provider, as a consultant.
Is that primarily for that year-long business program? Are they mostly coaches, creatives, consultants, that kind of thing? Is that typically who's in there, or is it sort of
Yeah.
any type of entrepreneur that's building a business?
Yeah, and service providers, people who are really focused on building an online business, which I
Yeah.
do think is, most businesses today,
Yeah.
but a business around their kind of expertise and their mission and what they really care about, not just like a not so much physical product businesses, for example. I'm not getting that. I'm not getting as many affiliate marketers. I'm getting people who've got like a burning passion, desire, body of work, expertise. Um,
Subject matter expert kind of people.
yeah, people
Yeah.
who want to build something that just aligns with their path in life and what they're good at. Or people who are like, you know what, I want to do something online. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I know I want to do something.
So what's next for you? You still just following the breadcrumbs, or do you have like some, some your eyes on big things, or are you just taking it as it goes still?
Well, both then. I mean, I always set big 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and 10 year goals. And
Yeah.
so, really, this experience design piece and using experience design to create extraordinary um, educational experiences, but also extraordinary customer and team experiences. I think has so much potential, especially the way that the market is going, and creating experiences that awaken human potential, that awaken the drive to learn and grow, that get people excited. I mean, this is sort of my jam, and I think there's more and more applications for it, and using technology within those experiences, but not as a way to replace the human aspect, but
It's
more
a
as a way to enhance.
proper use of technology. Like I love it. Yeah, it's all about the human experience, but can you use AI? Can you use technology to help drive that further? I think that's awesome. So we'll put all the ways to get in contact with you in our show notes, of course, and your website. Anything else for us before we go?
Well, if you're curious more about this experience design
Yeah,
element, how to what I call push the dopamine button in the brains of your customers, the brains of your team, getting people kind of hooked on doing things that are actually, life changing and life enhancing. I do have a report on the dopamine button that you can grab at liveyourmessage.com/leaders lab. So live your message is the name of my company.com/leaders lab. So if you want to find out more about that specifically, I'd say check it out.
very cool. Marisa, thanks so much for telling us about your background and the path to success with your company. It's awesome and really cool to speak with someone who's brought it all full circle and who's living in alignment, really, with what your skills are and contributing something great to the world. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
You too.